the Team Performance Podcast with Spencer Horn and Christian Napier. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Team Performance Winning Ways for Uncertain Times podcast. I'm Christian Napier, and I'm joined in this new year by my illustrious, distinguished, incomparable colleague, Spencer Horn. Spencer, how are you?
I'm so well, Christian. Happy New Year to you. How are you?
I'm doing well. Very happy New Year to you. We haven't really spoken over the holidays too much. So how was Christmas? How was the New Year's celebration?
Oh my goodness. It was full. We actually scheduled some time last week, but with family, I know you were busy. I can't wait to hear about that. But our son just finished his serving a mission for our church. I think I've talked about that in the past. And so we right after Christmas, we drove. Sunday after Christmas, we drove down to Farmington, New Mexico, and he had been reassigned from the Philippines when COVID started, and that's where the mission home was. So we got to meet his mission president and mission mother, and then we went over to his area, which was Window Rock, Arizona. It's quite just beautiful up in kind of the high desert. Actually colder there than it is here right now, if you can believe it, as far south as it is.
Wow.
And then we drove through snowstorms through Moab, and we got home, and I don't know, we've just been having family time, playing games. I learned how to play poker this last Sunday. I've never played it in my life. So I don't know if you've ever played that, but it's kind of fun.
I honestly have no idea how to play poker or pretty much any card game for that matter. And I don't know why. My wife has tried to teach me on occasion, but I still don't quite get it. So, yeah.
Well, so my kids are, and my son, who's the returned missionary. I mean, we never play for money ever. But we have all these chips, and my wife learned on New Year's Eve. I kind of resisted. It's really fun. We played Texas Hold'em, two card draw. I don't know what it is, but anyway, it was really fun. And I won it all. My first time.
Well, the very definition of beginner's luck.
That's right. But it's learning about just the bluffing and the bullying. When you don't have a hand, to act like you have something, and causing other people to give in, and it's really interesting. And I think you'd enjoy it. I did anyway. I didn't, we're not playing for anything. We're just the chips. And so it was enjoyable. So that was something new for me. And just, things like games, and been running almost every morning. My son and I get up, and today there's a nice little fresh dusting of snow, about an inch. And we were the first tracks on the mountain, saw deer and woodpeckers and just all kinds of, it's just beautiful getting out and starting a new year fresh is exciting, because you have new goals, new focus. And so that's what we've been doing. How about you and your family?
Well, we had a very low-key Christmas.
Yeah.
Our children came back for New Year's, for Christmas Eve and Christmas. And so it was nice to have them around. And but we didn't go anywhere or do anything. It must be amazing to have your son back. I mean, after not really being able to see him for a long time, it must be really nice to have him home.
It is. And it's also very busy, because there's, he's getting ready to go to school. I mean, he starts, I think, tomorrow. So moving down to his new apartment, he just comes home, and then it's, moving out. We're looking for cars, and so working. And then last night we went shopping for cars, and, while he's here, we go exercise and run and do things together. And then he does stuff with my wife. It's wonderful to have him home. There's a hole when he's not here. That's for sure.
Wow. Well, where's he going to school?
So he's going to Ensign College, but he is living in Provo, and the goal is to, get get to BYU, but it's too good of a deal to pass up. You can get a great education for so little, and he's got all kinds of little scholarships that have really helped him. So it's just an amazing opportunity. But he's got several of his friends. I mean, he's already got involved in a volleyball league. When he was in high school, his senior year, they won the state championship in Nevada, and they had a really, really good volleyball team. And so several of those team members are living down in Provo, going to BYU. So they're going to get together and get the band back together.
Well, I want to dive into your topic of goals. You mentioned that the new year has started, and that's when we're all thinking about goals and resolutions and all those kind of things. And we take stock of what happened in 2020, and we looked forward to the new year. And so you contacted me with a lot of ideas. I've got a lot of ideas. I really want to talk about this topic. So I'm really excited, Spencer, to have you dig into it. So why don't you lead us out?
Well, thank you. This is something I was actually looking at some of the things that I posted last year, and I posted a couple of videos. My wife and I were in Grand Teton National Park last New Year's Day, and we were snowshoeing right at the base of Grand Teton, and I made a video talking about goals. And one of the things that I've learned, and this is jumping ahead. I want to go back and set the foundation. But one of the things that I was interested in mentioning, because of just the situation of 2020, back last year of January at this time, we really had no idea what we were in for 2020, right? And so many people are just like, all right, I'm ready for 2020 to be done. And I'm not sure that the challenges of 2020 are going away. They're going to continue to be here. So the reason I mention this is I gave us one suggestion for our goals, and it's because there's a phenomenon called Quitter's Day. I don't know if you've ever heard of Quitter's Day, but it's January 17th. And basically what happens is most people quit their resolutions or their goals by January 17th. They just give up or they forget. And one of the things that I was thinking is, how do we overcome this phenomenon of Quitter's Day? And the thing that I said is that you have to prepare for adversity. Now, I didn't think I was being prescient in any way. I just think that that's something that you need to consider, that when you set a goal, it's going to be hard. You're going to backslide. You're going to mess up. You're going to, you're going to feel like, well, what's the point or what's the use? But if you prepare for that mentally, if you prepare for it to be difficult, then you're not surprised when it is. And you're like, okay, I'm going to move forward. And so that's the thing that I thought was really interesting. And it was difficult to hit some of my goals last year just because of how challenging the year was. But when you're persistent and you stick with it, I feel like we finished the year really, really strong. And, my health goals, my financial goals, just everything kind of continued to go forward last year in spite of the difficulty. And I'm actually quite proud of that. I mean, it's a year that I'll look back on and say, wow, that was amazing what I feel like I was able to accomplish. And I don't know, I think you feel that way as well. I mean, all the challenges that you've been through. I mean, I'm actually proud of it. It's a year that I will always remember, not because it was some terrible year, but because it was difficult and we made it through that year.
Yeah, we're still alive. It's really interesting that you mentioned this concept of handling adversity, because in corporations, when we're doing our planning, we incorporate those kinds of things into our planning oftentimes, right? We do contingency planning. We do a scenario planning. We may game things out. We may conduct even simulations and tabletop exercises, depending on the nature of our work.
Yes.
where we plan to handle various scenarios.
Yes.
But we don't necessarily do that when we talk about our goals, right? We just think, oh, I'm going to set this goal, and
So
that's it.
true.
And we don't actually think about, well, what happens if scenario A, B, or C take place? How am I going to react to make sure that I can still hit my goal?
Right. So, for example, I mean that you're exactly right. And so, if you have a health goal, and I'm going to talk about goals versus actions and those sort of things. But if you have a goal to be healthy, and part of those action steps that you're doing are to eat healthy, and but you're going to be around a lot of parties during the holidays or in the future, well, then there's probably going to be food or an environment that is not conducive to supporting you in your goal. That's adversity, if you will, right? And so you actually have to plan for that contingency, to your point. So what do you do? How are you going to handle that? And what do you need to remove? What obstacles do you need to remove to make sure that your personal goals move forward? We in strategic planning, I like to do a process where we reverse engineer the challenges, right? So you go through and you figure out about all the strategic possibilities and come up with all these list of things, and then you have to say what must be true for this to be a good strategy, and you list all those things, what must be true, and the ones that you're most concerned are not true, then you actually have to test those, and and as you say, prepare for that. But in our personal life, we don't take that level of rigor to get past that quitter's day. And I think that's a great point that you bring up. Well said.
All right. So give us some more here, Spencer. You talked about what's the difference between a goal and an action. You know, you talked about having to set the foundation. So help
Yeah.
us lay out that foundation for us.
Well, I think it's important that we to me, losing weight's not a great goal, right? Or making more money, if you're a salesperson, closing more deals. I don't like goals that to me. I think the focus, Christian, should be on becoming what it is that you want to be. So, for example, I have a goal to be a healthy individual. What does that mean? That means, I have a good heart rate. Um, my cholesterol is good. I have certain body fat, all that kind of thing. So, but I'm a healthy individual. And so to me, it's becoming an individual that behaves in a way that is consistent with someone that's a healthy individual, instead of just saying, hey, I'm going to run this many times. Now, in order to achieve that goal of becoming a healthy individual, we have to change our habits and who we are. The habits are what drive us to the goal, right? And so, and those things that you can measure, the actions are things that help you to become, and those habits are designed to help reinforce the goal, which in this case we're talking about becoming a healthy individual. And you get to define what that is. And for me, I want to run and not be weary, and walk and not faint, so to speak, right? I want to make sure that I make healthy choices with my food. I don't want to be someone that overdoes it. I want to enjoy, a good steak and a good dessert from time to time. But at the same time, I want to feel my body strong. I want to be able to run up a mountain. I want to be able to ski. I want to be able to play with my kids. I want to be able to live a long life and not have to worry. And so, I remember 2 years ago, I set a goal that was a weight loss goal. I mean, to be healthy. And I set a goal on January 15th to lose 10 pounds by March 15th. So in 2 months. And of course, that's kind of a superficial goal, but it was my goal. And the actions, there's really only two things that you can do that will impact that in terms of actions, right? You can eat less and exercise more. But I was very, very careful about recording all of my actions. So there has to be this level of accountability to become that healthy individual. So I measured every calorie I burned. I measured every calorie that I took in, and I lost in 2 months, I lost 12 pounds. And what was funny is I had this false sense of security after that, thinking, oh, it's really not that hard. Um, I stopped keeping track of the actions that I took every day. And over the next 7 months, I only lost 2 pounds. So to me, one of the things that I learned from all of this is there's a couple things. First of all, what do you want your identity to be? To me, that's the goal. What kind of person do you want to be? Caring, loving, understanding person, and a knowledgeable individual. To me, that's the goal, right? But then what are the actions that it's going to take for you to get to that? And then you can define those very specifically, and they should be measured. And the more you measure them, the more likely you are to get to that person that you want to be.
So I have a couple of thoughts on this, Spencer.
Yeah.
Number one, our old friend Adrian Escalante, who you remember, who I haven't seen for years, but I remember when I was working with him back in the 1990s. He would say, you need to focus on the result and not the activity, because if you have a kid and you say to your kid, sweep the floor, well, you go back and check the floor later and it's still dirty. And you ask, well, did you sweep the floor? He said, yeah, I swept the floor. It's quite possible to sweep the floor, but not do a good job of sweeping the floor. So you actually went through the activity of sweeping the floor, but you didn't really do it. And you're interested not in the activity of sweeping. What you're interested in is a clean floor, right? The result of a clean floor. And you're right. Sometimes we will get wrapped up in activities and not focused on results. And that actually was something that really helped me in business, because I would go to meetings and people would talk about all the activities that they were doing. Well, we met with this person and we met with this.
They really don't matter, do they?
But they weren't actually getting anything done. They were just having a lot of meetings. And so it's so much better, I think, if you focused on the becoming or the result. The other downside with kind of the, well, I'm going to lose 10 pounds in 2 months, which is actually a representation of a result, but isn't really the result itself, which is I want to become the healthy person.
That's right. So my goals have evolved, because at that point, it was about the losing of the 10 pounds.
Right.
But that's not, to me, that's not a great focus.
And one of the reasons for that is that you can start cheating yourself, right? You can say, well, okay, 10 pounds, 2 months. Well, I can kind of slack off for 6 of these 8 weeks. And then I'm just going to really hit it hard for 2 weeks and I'll get down my 10 pounds and then I'll feel good about myself. And actually what you have done there is you really haven't done yourself any favors by doing that, because you're not behaving like a healthy person. You're just behaving like a person that wants to get down to 10 pounds in 2 months. And then what?
So there's really 3 levels of change. There's outcome change, there is process change, and then there's identity change. I mean, what I'm talking about here is setting a goal that is changing your identity as an organization, as an individual, becoming something. And those habits should reinforce that becoming goal, if that's making sense.
Absolutely. So tell us about this. How do we, well, I guess number one is, how do you even identify what you want to become? I mean, and make sure that it's in the realm of the possible, because you don't want to, you don't want to, aim for the stars, so to speak, and just set yourself up for failure. But, how do you carefully set this identity goal for yourself?
It's really interesting. I last time when we were getting ready to have this conversation, I actually had a couple of files up which I could share on my screen, and I forgot to do that today because we decided to just jump on. But if you give me a second, I'll pull these up. And I think something that's really important to do, Christian, is to identify core values. Okay, what is really, and I think we've talked about this in the past, haven't we? We've talked about identifying core values.
Yep.
And who living in a way that is in alignment with who you say you are and what you believe is important to you. And I'll give you an example of that. I mean, one of the things that, this will be June this year will be 35 years married, and I'm constantly working on being a better husband. I want to be the husband. I mean, one of my goals is to be the husband my wife deserves, and I mean, she deserves a lot. I often feel that I am not adequate to what this wonderful woman deserves, and so I think about what I can do to be better and bring her more joy. I mean, that is important to me, but it's hard because a big part of my nature is selfish, right? It is focused on some things that I want to do, and sometimes I have to put that. And I'll give you an example of that. So one of my goals is to always spend quality time with my family, be the husband my wife deserves, right? And so one of the ways that I figure out what actions to do is I evaluate. And you can do this in your relationship. You can create let me pull this up. I'm almost ready here. I've been doing this while we're talking. Is you kind of self-evaluate your life, your relationship, and let me share my screen with you to tell you what I'm talking about. And on a scale from say 1 to 10, how's your relationship with your wife? How do you think she feels about you or your husband, right? And so what you do is you have this wheel. And right, you've got money, you've got health, you've got fun and recreation, significant other and romance, and family and friends and career. And so what you would do is, how is your relationship with your significant other on a scale from 1 to 10? I mean, if you asked your wife how good your communication is and how loved she feels, I mean, what would she say on a scale from 1 to 10?
Depends on when you ask her.
Yeah. And let's say, let's say it's a 6 here or 7. Well, this is a 7, you'd mark it here as a 7. Well, that's pretty good. But what would it take to get to 9? What would you have to do differently? How would your conversations be different? How would the arguments go when someone criticized you? How would you respond? And this is how I think. What would my response be like when Jana said something to me that I didn't feel was fair? Would I get defensive, or would I stop and listen? And so then I think of the actions that I would take to be that more loving husband that she deserves. And I think, okay, if I got better at those things, then maybe that would move to the 9. And I could check in with her. That's the accountability, right? How am I doing? What do I lack yet in our relationship? What am I doing that you wish I would? What am I not doing that you wish that I would be? What am I doing that you wish I wouldn't be doing? And what am I doing that you love? And I'll talk about that in a minute, because that's also very, very important. So to answer your question, one of the things I do first of all is I evaluate, where am I at? And where would I like to be? And you can do that. Not only this is what's called a wheel of life, right? You can do that in your profession and your career. So here's one for this is called a professional assessment, and these are all for personal goal setting, right? So you go through and you look at how satisfied you are with things and, relationships and the results that you're, are you creatively able to express yourself? Are you getting the recognition you need? Are you having the satisfaction that you want? And so on and so forth. Is the communication the way you'd like it? Is the culture the way you want it? And you go through and you score yourself and you figure out where you want to get better. And this is a great way to just self-evaluate and then look at what's going on with that wheel and say, is this in alignment with my values? Is the fact that my relationship low, does that in any way taking away from the value that I have of being, of loving and caring individual that I want to be. Well, obviously it's not congruent. So I get to work on that.
So here's my question, Spencer.
Yeah.
I love the wheel. I think it's great, but and I realize that I could improve in all areas, but I cannot possibly do all of that this year. So
Can't.
how do I go through what's the process that I need to follow to identify what I should be doing this year? What is it that I need to be focusing on now? Because I can't amp everything up to 10 in 1 year.
No, you can't. And so the way I do it is I pick one or two things. It's just like a strategic plan. You come up with all these great plans, but you can't work on everything at once. And what happens is if you do, nothing gets done. And then the strategic plan just becomes like our goals. Quitter's Day happens and they're never carried forward. There is there's something my son and I talked about this morning when we went for our run. We went up to Mueller Park and he's a warm weather guy, grew up in Las Vegas, served most of his mission in the Philippines. And so I'm getting him to kind of like the idea of, how the cold feels on your face and how wonderful it is. And he's coming around, but he says, Dad, the thing that I love every day about going for a run, starting my day with a run, is I feel the progress almost every day. I feel like I can go a little bit further, a little bit faster. And this is a concept that I don't know if you know who Dave Ramsey is, the total money makeover guy. Yeah. By the way, this is one of the things our family is doing as a goal, is focusing on getting out of debt and getting financially stable. But one of the principles that he teaches is that getting financially stable is 80% habit and 20% knowledge. And he talks about what's called, and this is all relevant to your question, so give me a second to explain. He talks about the debt snowball, right? You list all of your debts, and most people would look at that and say, all right, we've got to pay the highest interest rate debts first because those are the ones that are most expensive. He says, don't do that. Start with the smallest debt first and pay that off, and take whatever it is that you are paying to that and then add it to the next debt. And the reason why he suggests that is you have to have wins, Christian. You've got to have a win. It's just like my son saying, I feel like every day that I go, I feel a little bit better. And so it's encouraging to feel progress towards your goal. And so one of the things that I like to do with organizations when we do a strategic plan is to set priorities, and we'll work on just one or two of those. And you do that for a limited time. It could be a quarter, it could be 6 months. And so think of, let's just go back to the improve, be the husband that our wives deserve. What is the one thing that if you got really good at would make the most difference right now? And I'm going to put you on the spot. What is, if there was one thing that you could do right now that could just make a difference, if you asked her, what would it be? Just one.
Wow, narrowing it down to one. That's a tough one. But I would have to say improve communication.
Okay, what does that look like? I mean, talk to me about what about the communication would be different.
I have a tendency, just because of my natural communication style, to kind of hold things in, and it's not done out of malice. It's done out of,
you want to rock the boat.
Yeah, I don't want to rock the boat. Well, it's not even so much just rock the boat, but I don't want to say anything that could be potentially hurtful or whatever, right? And usually what happens in those cases is things are fine for 99% of the time, and then we run into some kind of a situation, and then it just really escalates way beyond what it should escalate because I've been holding this in for
because you
a long
waited
time.
longer than maybe you could have. And if you had addressed it earlier, then the emotions wouldn't have been as strong as they are because they've built up. Is that what I'm hearing
Yeah,
you say?
yeah, yeah.
So so the behavior then is to what? To share your perspective in a loving way sooner. I mean, I think of the out, think of what it is that you want to do in a positive way. What is it that you would like to do better?
And you know, we we're taught in our faith. The quote I would give would be to reprove betimes with sharpness, right? That we should be very clear
Direct, yeah.
and in any kind of criticism if we need to do that. And oftentimes what happens is I'm not clear, right? I'm very cloudy in what I say, and so I don't do a very good job of getting my idea across. And so one of the things that I need to definitely work on is trying to communicate with more clarity,
Okay.
getting really to the point, in a very loving way,
Right.
but being very, uh, very
Specific.
focused and specific
Right.
on what I'm talking about, not generalize into, well, you're this way or you're that way. It's not about the characteristics. It's very specific behavior that you know, that I may need to discuss or whatever.
So thank you for being so vulnerable and open. So here's one of the things that I have learned from some incredible coaches, and I think this goes all the way back to Ben Franklin. It's called the daily questions, right? And there's a whole bunch of questions on here, and I'm not suggesting you have a question, but I'd like for you to write down this one question, and that is, it always starts with, "Did I do my best?" You see at the very top here.
Yep.
So what you ask yourself at the end of every day, Christian, right now is, did I do my best to communicate clearly and focused on what I need in a way that demonstrates love? I know that's a little bit long. You could maybe refine that, but that's the question that you're going to ask yourself every day. So here's a couple of things that I wrote as just ideas, right? Work toward, this was done many years ago, work towards my book completion, um, work to preserve a client relationship, be grateful for what I have, avoid angry or destructive comments about others, forgive self and others for perceived mistakes. So these are things that you could be working on, right? Not waste energy on what I cannot change. Meditate, get a good night's sleep, eat healthy, whatever it is. Show patience. So for me, being present with the ones I love and showing patience are things that I've worked on in the past. So for you, it is, did I do my best to communicate clearly, focused in a way that shows love and in however you want to say that. And then every day you rate yourself on a scale from 1 to 10. Now, this is not designed in any way to create a false, you have to be completely honest. So if you sucked today at being clear and focused in your communication and you held it in, then score yourself a 2 or 3 or whatever you think you actually did. But the key is not to judge yourself, right? Just to score it. And then to be curious, what was it about today that it was hard for me to do what I wanted to do? How was I feeling? What was going on? And all that it does is every day that you put, your goals in here. Okay, today I was a 3. Well, tomorrow I want to do a little bit better. And so, at the end of the day, you evaluated, you were a 5. You could have been a little bit more clear, but you did a little bit better than yesterday. And you backslid a little bit. Oh, and then you had a really good day. So you do that every single day. And I want you to be curious about when you don't have a score that's what you want. And at the end of the week, you're going to average up your score. And I promise you that if you focus on this one behavior for 3, 4 weeks, it will start to become part of you. it will start to become a habit that becomes easier over time. And as soon as you get to where your scores are averaging 8, 9, and you feel like that's good, then stop worrying about it and start working on another behavior that you want to work on. So you do this serially, right? You don't work on everything at once, because that becomes overwhelming, and then we can start beating ourselves up and we don't see progress. But work on one or two behaviors that you feel like would make the biggest impact on that goal to have that strong relationship with the person you love.
I like that idea a lot. I also like the notion that uh, as time evolves and as you become proficient in one thing, go ahead and move on to something else. So you don't become overwhelmed with a list of 450 items on there.
Right.
Just focus on the things that are most critical. So talk about how you identified those particular things to be on your list. I mean, so you start out with this high level identity change thing.
Yeah.
What process did you go through to then break it down into components that you could put on a spreadsheet and track?
So you just start with any brainstorming process, you just come up with all the ideas, right? Um, it's the same thing as doing a strategic plan. You've got a challenge or a strategic problem. The first thing you do is you open it up with all of the ideas, and a lot of organizations really struggle with this because they start focusing on what we can and can't do. Don't just start to list, right? So, for example, one of my goals is, this is very personal, become sanctified and justified spiritually, right? And so I create a whole list of things or actions that would help me to get to that state. Now, some of these things I'm already doing, but I look at that and I say, okay, what is something that I could get better at? And one of those is to self-examine more regularly, daily, what lack I yet, kind of thing. And in terms of a spiritual nature, and be really, we're studying, in the scriptures right now about how the Lord wants, he says, he says this in Proverbs as well, that I believe it's Proverbs 13. What does he say? That he who cannot, give me a second, I'll look it up. Do you mind?
Go ahead.
I think everyone can relate to Proverbs if I can find that. I think it's Proverbs 13. Anyway, it's just being able to. Oh, come on, Spencer, my technology here. To receive correction, right? In a sense, this graph that I'm sharing with you, the daily questions, is a way to evaluate how you're doing every day and where you get to be better, right?
Right.
And so the Lord tells us, and I know we're getting a little bit spiritual here. In Proverbs 13:11, it says, "My son, despise not the chastening of the Lord, neither be weary of his correction. For whom the Lord loveth, he correcteth, even as the Father the Son in whom he delighteth." And I think that's wonderful. And that was hard for me because of my pride and my, just how I when anyone would criticize me, I would get defensive, and that's not conducive to becoming the person I want to become, right? It actually prevents me from learning what I need to do to get better every day. So in a way, when you use this process, you're almost correcting yourself. You're looking at, wow, I really didn't do a good job. Don't beat yourself up. Just take the correction and say, okay, what was happening? Be curious. What could I do better? What lack I yet? And focus forward, not on the fact that you didn't hit a 5 or an 8, you had a 3. It's not about beating yourself up. It's about recognizing that there's room for improvement and just work on that. And the mental focus on that one action you'll start to see progress very quickly. You won't be deluded in your actions, and you'll see that progress, and the relationship will improve, and you will feel the success of having made that change. And that is very motivating and very rewarding. So
So
that's the process.
I really, really love this, Spencer. I have a thought on this. Um, Oftentimes at this time of year, when we're setting goals and people are making resolutions, uh, a potential harmful side effect of this process is that we feel more inadequate, right? Just by the very nature of taking an evaluation and looking where we can improve,
Yeah.
we believed ourselves to not be adequate in certain areas, and that can be a healthy thing to help us drive us to improve. But it can also be destructive if we allow it. You made this little quote here, and I know it's spiritual time for whatever reason. At the beginning
Yeah.
of this year, uh, uh, you know the you talked about the parable of the rich young man, right? Who
Yeah.
asked the question, "What do I need to do to get into heaven?"
What
And
lack I
then,
yet?
yeah, and the Savior lists a bunch of things, and then it's what lack I yet, and the Savior says, "One thing thou lackest, go sell everything that you have and
And
come
come
follow
follow
me."
me. Yeah.
Right? And he can't bring himself to do it.
Right.
But to me,
At that
at
time,
this
we
at this
don't know that he might not have done it later.
that's true. But to me, uh, if the Savior told me I only lacked one thing, I would think I'm doing pretty darn awesome,
Yeah.
right? But in the case of this young man, he's like, "Oh man, I'm lacking something."
Right.
You know, and sometimes we just need to not be too hard on ourselves to the point where we lose hope because we have been criticized, or we are self-critical, and
That's
we
right.
think, "Oh, well, I'm not a good person because I'm not a 10 in all these areas, or I'm
That's
not
right.
a good person because I really lack in this particular area." The very fact of the matter is, you're probably a really good person, and there are just a few things that you need to do
That's
to
right.
improve yourself. And that to me is a really important lesson that we don't often get when we talk about that particular parable that you were referencing there.
That's right.
um, uh, because I mean, if we step back, and if someone said, "You know what, you're doing fantastic, there's just one thing that you need to do better, just one. If you just focused on this one thing, it'd be amazing." and
That's
and
right.
if
And
someone
but
said
that's to
that,
the answer. That's answering your concern about focusing on everything. You can't focus on everything because that becomes overwhelming.
yes. So I think it's important to have a balanced view of yourself when you do these evaluations. Uh, and
Right.
and yes, we all need to improve. We all fall short. We all need to do better in certain areas. But at the same time, don't let that thought drown you in hopelessness. You know, Recognize also that you actually do a lot of good things, and it's okay. It's all right to lack in a few things, and focus on those. It's normal. It's natural. That's why we're here. You
That's right.
know. So I just think that's an important thing. Is
It is, and it is. It's like I said when we started. 2020 was a challenging year. It was a hard year, and there's so much to be learned during hardship. People who have hardship in their life actually make oftentimes use that situation or those occurrences to make huge changes in their lives. We're starting to see huge societal changes because of these difficulties. Some may be good, some not so good, but you can use hardship and challenge to be a really big catalyst for change. But it just starts with something small. Get up and do. was talking to someone who, ran a marathon. It just started by, running around the block, just getting up or walking around the block. If that's where you can start, and could you be perfect at getting up and doing something that day? You could be perfect. It doesn't mean you could run a marathon today, but you could be perfect in every day getting up and walking a little bit further, even if it's 5 seconds further. Over time, what will happen is that will compound. There's a great book that I would love to recommend, and it's called Atomic Habits by his name is James Clear. It's one of the best books that I've ever heard on habits, and he really talks about the idea that habits can change our beliefs about our identity, and that's what he focuses on, is how do you change your beliefs, and do you identify with being a healthy individual? Do you identify with being a productive or an effective manager, right? Or do you identify with being inadequate in all these areas? So it's really about changing your identity and recognizing that you don't have to be perfect. But if you're scoring 3s and 4s and an average of 4 this week, what happens if you're at 4.5 next week? Well, that's progress, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
So focus on that little bit of progress, even though it may be hard and it'll take time. And eventually you'll get to where you're that 8 or 9. We're never perfect, but you can be certainly perfect in the effort and constantly self-evaluating and being curious about what's happening and what your progress is. And that really helps you to focus. And I think doing this process, it's, sequentially, once you figure that out, then work on the next thing. It's just a little bit better over time. And it really adds up.
So what is the secret sauce to overcoming adversity then when you have these goals? Is it the tracking on the spreadsheet? What is it that allows you to get past the 17th of January?
Well, there's a couple of things. It's a great question. First of all, recognize that the 17th of January is going to come. Recognize that someone's going to bring home a nothing bundt cake, or a treat that's going to mess up your diet, and figure out a way to lower the resistance. So for example, if getting up and running in the morning is your goal, but when you wake up, you're feeling like, oh, I just can't do it. What could you do to make it easier for you to actually get up and out of bed? Lay out your clothes, right? Reduce the friction as much as possible. Remove from your house anything that might tempt you. So you want to remove those temptations. It's going to be hard, but so you want to lower that friction of continuing on creating that habit. So for me, if it's running, one of the things I do is I lay out my clothes. And so, because Jan and I have very different schedules, I'm early to bed, early to rise. She's late to bed. So when I get up, it's dark, and I could just say, oh, I'm just going to heck with it, I'm going to sleep in. But I don't. I get up and then I get into our closet and I turn on my light. The clothes are all there. I quickly get dressed, and then I get into my routine. And so that really helps me to lower the friction of getting into that action that I need to do. So the question is, reduce the friction. If you want to learn how to play the guitar, make sure the guitar is out where you can see it, and it's in a place where you'll remember to start building that habit, right? Put it prominently. If you have a certain time, maybe set it in the hallway where you actually have to walk around it to get to it. Like, oh, pick it up and I'm going to go start practicing. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. Yeah, absolutely makes sense.
Those are some of the things that I found. And as I said in the beginning, is anticipate that it's going to be hard and persist. You have to persist. You have to push through that time. One of the things that Dave Ramsey talks about in the Total Money Makeover, he talks about preparing for Murphy's Law, right? And the first thing is you figure out what your debts are, but you put $1,000 away for emergencies. For very first thing. And you're like, well, an emergency is I've got a birthday, or I need to do, it's, the car breaks or something like that happens. And eventually you get to a place where you have, 3 to 12,000, whatever it is. Let's say your emergency fund is to cushion you if you lost a job for 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is. But you start with just that 1,000, because he says Murphy will show up. And when you're ready, it's not as big of an impact. If you're expecting Murphy to show up, if you're expecting the resistance to happen, then you're not surprised when it does. And at some point in our lives, it actually gets easier when we start, whatever reason, Murphy starts to give up when you're really prepared. It just doesn't catch you. Or if it does, you're so prepared that you don't even feel it. So for me, it is, I'm going to prepare for the fact that it's going to be hard to get up. And I'm going to make it as easy as possible, put my clothes out. I'm going to, if I know it's going to be hard, I'm going to ask someone else to meet me there. So that will cause me to want to show up, because if I don't, then I'll be letting someone else down, and that extra pressure causes me to get up. I will do things to help reduce that friction and cause me to get into that habit sooner.
I think it's an excellent idea. The Dave Ramsey thing. It's funny when, and just to kind of wrap us up here, because I know time is running along. When the pandemic hit, as we've documented here on this podcast, I mean, basically all of my contracts were put on hold, and
yeah,
I went the first half of last year with virtually no revenues. So that was quite difficult. And I remember when we finally got some contracts signed and we had some revenues coming in.
Yeah,
they were a fraction of the revenues that we originally anticipated for the year, but I sat down with my wife, and she was the one that said, we need to make sure that we have a certain amount of money set aside here.
right.
And at the time I was a little skeptical. And the only reason I was skeptical is like, well, that's fine, but we only have a fraction of money coming in than we did in the past. So how are we possibly going to set aside
right
a certain amount of money for contingencies? But we, for the first time in our married lives, we really sat down, and every week we were going over every expenditure, and we were looking at the finances. And I don't know how, but somehow we were able to maintain this contingency fund even through these difficult times when I had maybe less than 1/3 of the revenues coming in than I normally have. We were able to do that because of what you just said, which is just keeping track of things and having dialogue and conversations with each other.
That's the accountability. You had that weekly accountability with your spouse.
So,
that's the key.
And we weren't perfect. I mean, there are sometimes we didn't, we would go 2 weeks or more, but I was keeping track of all of this stuff in a spreadsheet to much greater detail than I had ever done in the past.
God,
And
that's so cool.
And to this day, up until now, we've been able to actually maintain that contingency without having to dip into it in the event that something else crazy, another Murphy happens. And
right.
And I'm in a situation where I don't have any revenues for another 6 months or something. But now we feel like we're in a much better position, even though in 2020, our revenues really took a hit.
Yeah.
But somehow we were still able to maintain that level of contingency throughout it. We didn't actually have to dip into it at all.
Well, you have inspired me. That's what we were working on, and Jan and I have not had that level of accountability financially, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing this. Is our whole family's doing this. We have been meeting weekly on Zoom with all of our children and spouses to do this as a whole family, and we're all inspiring each other to be more accountable and wise in our finances. So that's one of our family goals. And well, I'll tell you, I've got some bucket list stuff too, because you want to have some fun stuff. And And so my wife, so for me personally, I made a list. I just want to, before we end, when it comes to me being healthy and happy, I've added climb all the highest peaks in Utah as one of my goals. And I've listed, and there's like 30 of them, but let's see, 5 of them are over 12,000 feet. And so I've listed 6 mountains that I've not climbed that I want to climb this year, and a whole bunch of fun hikes. And I've already applied for permits to go to the Wave or the Vermilion Cliffs Wilderness, Antelope Canyon. You have to get a lottery. They only allow 20 people a day into that. And so I'm getting ahead on my goals, and I signed up for a lottery. But I'm going to climb Kings Peak this year. That's 13,534 feet. Mount Peel, that's the second highest mountain in Utah, 12,726. That's in the La Salle Mountains, right outside of Moab. Bald Mountain, almost 12,000 feet in the Uintas. Mount Nebo, never climbed that before. That's almost 12,000 feet. Twin Peaks here on the Wasatch Front. That's a tough climb. I want to do that. And then Deseret Peak out in the Stansbury Mountains. So these are all part of my bucket list. And then I want to do all the highest mountains in like North America and in Canada. And, you know, so I want to do this. These are some, and then we listed all the places we want to go. And I had my wife, we put them in priority. So number 1 is Philippines with our son, Josh. Number 2 is Russia with our daughter, Grace and Rhett. Number 3 is France with Sarah and Michael. We've got, hopefully we'll get to Greece and Cyprus this year. I may be speaking there, and we'll do a little European trip. But, you know, if you put them down, I years ago, my wife and I did this life planning process, and we went through a process and we listed all these things that we wanted to do, bucket list things that we thought were completely impossible. And she was very skeptical. And it is amazing what happens when you put them down. There are all kinds of things or ways to accomplish these goals that you didn't think would be possible. Just like you talked about creating that contingency plan, there are ways to accomplish that. And we were able to do things that we didn't even think were possible because opportunities arose that allowed us to go on a trip through business that then we could tack on something else that you know, a trip somewhere, and we were able to achieve that in ways that we didn't think was possible. But you just got to get together and plan and dream big as well.
All right. Well, Spencer, yeah, I don't even climb, and I want to go to the top of Deseret Peak or Twin Peaks or Mount Nebo, which is my favorite mountain in the Wasatch, because you can see it from just about anywhere in the Wasatch. So this has been fantastic. I feel really inspired. I'm really I'm really stoked for 2021. Thank you so much, Spencer. You have just scratched the surface on things that we can do to change our identities, set clear, achievable goals, and measure our progress. If people want to learn more about how you can help them with goal setting or any other myriad of things that you can do to help them, what's the best way for them to contact you?
You know, go to my website, altiumleadership.com, ALTIUM leadership.com. You can message me there or email me, spencer@altiumleadership.com. I will share with you any of these forms that I showed. You know, if you're listening, you didn't see, I showed some self-evaluation forms and daily question forms. I am happy to share those with you just as a gift. If you want to reach out to me, I'll be happy to give those and explain how to use them. That's the best way. And, you know, I know, Christian, you always are so generous in your comments, but you have so much knowledge, and you're always just so kind to ask the questions. But I know you apply this in your life as well. And so if someone wants to reach you for your wisdom and knowledge, how can they do that?
You can go to the website, gp4.com, gpfour.com. You can reach me at my email, cnapier, that's C as in Christian, and my last name Napier, at gp4.com, or you can just look me up on LinkedIn. Happy to help anybody if I can this year.
Well, and you've got a lot of that experience working with large organizations strategically and helping them come up with those plans. So I know that you could do that for just about anybody. So thank you.
Thank you, Spencer. Thank you, listeners, for a great 2020, and looking forward to a fruitful, prosperous 2021. Please like and subscribe to our podcast, and we'll catch you again soon.